Good evening,
Okay.
everyone, and welcome to our the fifth edition of our live stream. Joining me today is Juan, as always, and today we are going to cover the subject of COVID-19 and President Biden's policies on number one, combating COVID-19 as a pandemic, and number two, on recovery or at least alleviation of economic woes in the country and in specifically in our Vietnamese community. So welcome on.
Hi, everyone. Hi, welcome back to the Sunday live stream. So today we're talking about the topic of COVID-19 as well as the different policy that Biden has put in place in order to combat it. From personal opinion, this is a very interesting topic only because I'm a scientist and this gives me great pleasure to be able to explain the science behind first how the vaccine works, how the coronavirus attacked our respiratory system, and then how herd immunity can eventually be able to prevent a widespread of this virus. And then we can go back outside again.
Yes, and you guys have the dream team here today because one herself is she is a science person. I'm an economics person, so we will discuss the matter on both sides. Number one, how people are being affected, the health ramifications, and then on my side, I will discuss some of the economic policies and some of what we will be seeing in the stimulus package that has just passed the House, is going to the Senate, and what that means for our community. And so these are going to be the five topics that we are discussing today. Number one, again, is what are the policies to combat COVID-19. Number two is the different vaccines out there. Is the vaccine safe, and which vaccine is better? And I'm pretty sure An is going to be a big contributor on that front. Number three, how has the vaccine rollout been? Who and which group has been vaccinated so far, and what is the target of target basis that are getting vaccinated right now? And number four, how are these policies and strategies affecting the Vietnamese community? A lot of that is going to be economic, which I will be discussing. And then number five, finally, when will it be safe for students and college students to return to school? So starting off, let's go with number one. What are the policies to combat COVID-19? And Juan, I'm going to pass the bat to you.
Okay, so not 100% sure on the economic side of things, but I do know that the main goal for Biden's policy is to first put scientists back in charge of all the decisions for make sure that the everyone be able to get the vaccine as well as worry about the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine and of the frontline healthcare workers. And the second thing is to make sure that all data is released. So they're being very transparent when it comes to releasing any information regarding the vaccine versus the infections rates, and those are very helpful to actually gauge the coronavirus situation in America, since it's already been a year that we're in quarantine, and it's really good to have a better transparency of what's going on. And third is to authorize proper staff to make sure that the people that want to know more of the information have the time to look at the report and understand how the vaccine works, how every aspect of the plan works. So those are all great goals for the future plans that is coming in this the upcoming Biden plan.
Yes. Now, on the healthcare side of things, the focus of the administration is, of course, on vaccine rollout. What we have seen from the previous administration is a dearth of policies, a dearth of a roadmap to distribute these plans. They did not get additional fundings from Congress to provide to the states, and because of that, we saw a failure in distribution and a failure in procurement of the vaccine. Now, the previous administration had set a goal of 20 million vaccinations, so 20 million doses, which it's the equivalent of 10 million people being vaccinated by the end of 2020. Now, that did not happen at the end of 2020. We were only at 2.6%. And while the supply, Moderna and Pfizer were able to keep up with supply at the time, the administration and the government failed to procure that properly, to provide resources, to really help the states get those vaccinations, get those shots into people's arms. And now, when Biden, on Inauguration Day, what we saw was the number of vaccination was at 16 million doses. 16, okay? As of last Friday, that number has shot up to 68 million doses. That's more than 50 million doses. And of course, the Biden administration had celebrated that. That's 50, so that's more than 50 million doses being administered. And I'm gonna quote some numbers here. We are looking at um, about 20 million people who have received both doses of the vaccine. And one thing that the administration also had to do was go back to the negotiation table and get both Moderna and Pfizer to increase their supplies and to get the supplies to the US instead of selling it to other countries at this time. So those are some of the policies and some of the actions that the administration have taken. So are we ready to go on to number two?
Just a few more notes. I
Okay.
also read a little bit about his current upcoming plan, and it's just to make sure they restore the national security as well as the global health security for biodefenses, as well as provide free testing or anything relating to COVID for especially people in the lower income community, and prepared a lot of stand-up hospital beds that can be up at any time within any city if there is a outbreak or a hotspot of coronavirus. And they also, I believe, plans to allocate resources around 45% to state government, 45% to local government, and then the last 10% would go to any hotspot for coronavirus spreading. And that would pay for medical supplies, facilities, hirings, medical services, caregivers, teachers, etc. These would allow for people to get reimbursement, especially during the COVID hard times. And combined to that, there's also making sure to invest, I believe, in providing kind of like a lot of reimbursements, of food release for families that went hungry. I know a lot of children actually rely on help meals for lunch at their school, and since school is not available, there are definitely food reliefs as well as small and medium business side loan that Biden are planning to implement in the upcoming COVID package relief.
Absolutely. And I wanted to circle back to, you did mention the international community. Now, one thing that the Biden administration has done is that they have a plan to provide $2 billion in support and aid to low-income nations, to developing countries. I believe Vietnam may fall under that guideline. We're not too sure which countries will receive that aid, but it's great to be living under an administration in a country that takes care of our global community. It's not just about us. It's about taking care of everyone else that aren't able to do that for themselves. And I definitely feel very blessed that we have a president who thinks about those things. And again, it's $2 billion now, but that funding may go up to as high as $4 billion. And there's going to be pressure. The Biden administration is going to put additional pressure on our allies, on other developing countries like Europe, Canada, etc., to also help in that funding. And you had touched on the economics, on the stimulus package a little bit, so I'm going to briefly go over what that will entail. Number one, is going to cover the $1,400 stimulus checks that's coming out. It's going to provide about $130 billion to schools and colleges to help with reopening. about $39 billion in child care support, and additional funding for healthcare access, including COBRA and food assistance, as you mentioned. And that's going to be about to the tune of $5 billion.
Yeah, and those seems like really, really great numbers and great information
Mhm.
provided by the government. I'm really thankful to be able to finally really have some sense of relief regarding the COVID situation. And hopefully that by the end of this year, we should be able to be, all vaccinated and ready to enjoy life again. But I will go
Absolutely. Mhm.
ahead and go to the next topic, which is going to talk about there's different variety of COVID vaccine. And I know that the Johnson & Johnson one just came out with the third variation of the COVID vaccine. But first, I wanted to talk about how COVID works. So um, don't be too rough. I'm gonna try to explain it the best that I can. But first, the virus is definitely not living, basically, and it goes and it affects the cells right here, which is the type 2 alveolar cells. And then from there, it causes a lot of, and from there, it kind of like using hijacking the mechanism of the cells to be able to create more of the virus and thereby end up killing the cells, and then more things happen, but then eventually fill this kind of like air. I believe it's called It's called it's called alveolar cells. It fills it with fluid and then prevents proper oxygen transfer of the lungs into the bloodstream, and therefore that's why when people get infected with COVID, you can't breathe. Usually, most of the symptoms are very like respiratory based, so you can't seem to breathe, you have a hard time like have a hard time doing anything, and a lot of that contributing to the decrease of the kind of like the respiratory cells due to the COVID infection. And so how the vaccine works is by using the RNA of the virus, it gets injected into the body, and once your cell taken this RNA, it can create segments of the virus. And then from there, once it releases those segments, your T cells, which is basically your immune system to help you fight against different viruses, can recognize bits and pieces of that viruses. And then from there, you should be able to recognize it if they see it later on. So this is very helpful in the past. With in the past, they tend to use only dead viruses, which mean like viral protein that doesn't do us any harm. This one doesn't do us any harm either, which has been shown in the testing of different clinical studies. But this is a lot more kind of like a newer version of the vaccine that allows for our immune system to recognize potential threat and then eliminate that threat right at the get-go. And so the reason why this is important and why, anti-vaxxer movement might be problematic is because you need a proper amount of people to be vaccinated before the immune can the immunity can work. Because what happened here, when you only have a variety of people vaccinated, it can still transfer from people to people that aren't being protected. So this person could have been vaccinated, but because they choose not to, the virus can go on to this person, either through coughing or respiratory and any breathing if we don't wear a mask out in public. And what that does is in every new person, the virus have the opportunity to mutate itself. And the more it mutates, the more the vaccine doesn't work anymore. And since we worked so hard to create this type of vaccine, if it doesn't work, then that means we have to start process all over again. And typically for medicine, it takes around 10 years for both research and development to clinical studies to FDA trials to be able to come out in the market. And that is why we have to make sure that everyone gets vaccinated, please. um, but back to talking about our topic, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is roll out quite recently, and they have a lot of like it's really good for us because J&J has pledged to provide 100 million additional dosage by the end of June which in addition with the 600 million of doses from Pfizer and Moderna. I apologize, Moderna. But the only problem is that it shows a 72% efficacy rate in comparison to the other vaccine, which is quite high. I believe it's around 92%. That can, be efficacy against the coronavirus. But Dr. Fauci still believe that it can work because 72% versus 90-ish, 90 something percent is not a big deal as long as you can get the vaccine. So as long as you have try to build up your immunity and get any type of the vaccine, you still could be able to get more and more people be able to get the vaccine. Obviously, I'm not an immunologist at all, so I can't recommend one over the other. I just know that the 72% is also quite high when it comes to efficacy rate because some drugs doesn't work on all the population. So that is something to keep in mind of when you go and take your vaccine.
All right, and I'm
Yeah, I'll let you continue.
okay. Well, I wanted to add on to what you said. Now, the great thing about the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, as someone who's afraid of needles, it's only one shot, not two. One shot. Moderna and Pfizer are both two shots. Now, one thing that I've read is that we shouldn't just look at efficacy rate. So with the Johnson and Johnson vaccine now, even if you have it and you catch the coronavirus and it develops into COVID-19, when you have that vaccine in your body, the severity of the disease is going to be a lot less severe than it would be without the vaccine. So it does help your body fight the vaccine. So even though the efficacy is not as high as Pfizer or Moderna, and I know that's such a tough word to say, right? But even though the efficacy is not as high as Pfizer or Moderna, it's still going to help you fight the still going to help your body fight COVID and not and your body avoid the severe symptoms, the severe cases that we've seen in some of the more some of the more severe cases. So definitely with the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, that's going to help us and the pandemic. So if, in my opinion, and from what I've read, if you can get on any of those vaccines, do it. It's going to help end the pandemic.
And Hui here has a really good question about getting COVID after vaccination. So in order for the COVID vaccines to work, you need a proper time of incubation to make sure your cells can produce bits and pieces of the virus to be able for your whole body to identify the virus as well as be able to clear it out. And so you need a proper kind of like incubation time, and that's why the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine is like a 2 week. It's kind of like a 2 dosage period to make sure that your body can really fight against that infection. But keeping that in mind, if you get COVID right after you get your vaccine, your body is not prepared yet to be able to handle any type of COVID reaction. They're still in the initial phase. So you still have to be quite careful even after you get your vaccine to be able to make sure that you don't have COVID and you allow your body to do its thing, like treat it as like a 2 week self relaxing day or whatnot, but to make sure that the vaccine is efficacious, the vaccine's efficacy is can apply to your situation. Yeah,
absolutely. And from my understanding too, is that even those who have received the vaccine, they're fully vaccinated, they can still the virus can still foster in their body. And so even if you have had the vaccine, still you still need to mask up, you still need to follow social distancing and other health guidelines until we have the pandemic under control.
Yeah, also keep in mind that if we're not diligent about getting our vaccine, the virus can mutate and become something that we can't fight and we have to restart over. So if you can, please get your vaccine. We're rolling out phase 1B right now of the vaccination plan. So if you can, please get your vaccine as soon as possible.
All right, and then it brings us to our next point, which is how has the vaccine rollout been so far, and which group has been vaccinated, and what is the target target for all citizens to be vaccinated. So Anna, I'm going to pass that to you first.
Okay, so this is the typical plan right now that we have for the vaccine. Let me try to get to it right now. So first we have the phase 1A to phase 1B. Both take a while to be able to implement. Phase 1A is mainly a lot of the older, a lot of healthcare workers. So first, frontline workers, they are going to receive the phase 1A, and then phase 1B start rolling out to more essential workers. And eventually phase 1C gets to people in the middle age, people kind of like around phase 1B and phase 1C would be around people with relatively high risk as well. And then phase 2 would be the rest of our humanity. So this is also a good graphic to be able to see. Just know that HCP stand for healthcare workers, and LTCF is long-term care facilities. So these definitely gets the first because they deal with people that are sick as well as our elders who are a lot older than us and very easy to succumb to the COVID vaccine. And then phase 1B would be a combination of people that are a lot older that also might get a chance to be high risk. And then eventually you move on to is frontline workers, essential workers, and then lastly is people without high risk. So people between 16 to 64 years of age and with very low risk of medical condition. But by then we should be able to have built a herd immunity to allow all of us to be able to go back outside, hopefully with no mask, because I would love to see everyone's beautiful faces now.
I will say though, seeing how disgusting some people are, I kind of want to keep my mask on even after this, even after this pandemic. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to add on to what you said. One, we have about 91 million doses has been distributed so far, and 68 million of those doses have been administered. So that is a 74.48% administration rate. And we have, again, as I've mentioned earlier, about 21.5 million people have received their full 2 doses. And that doesn't end, of course, now that we have the Johnson & Johnson vaccines come in, which only requires 1 dose. We're going to see that number spike up. And what we've seen as far as a difference between the previous administration and this one is that in the previous administration, early January, the CDC was saying that they don't expect us to be fully vaccinated even through 2022. Again, we're only in 2021 right now. They were afraid that we weren't going to vaccinate the country by 2022, and as soon as Biden sworn into office, he made a pledge to vaccinate 100 million people by the end of, I believe, was April, and to have the country be fully vaccinated by the end of the summer. And they are well ahead, well on track, and actually a few weeks ahead at this rate. So we are seeing some very promising numbers in terms of vaccination.
Yeah, and it's also good to keep in mind the main goal of this is just to make sure we can achieve herd immunity, especially for people that does have adverse effect to the vaccine and they can't get the vaccine. You would build kind of like a safety net around so that the virus can't travel far and can't mutate it so that it doesn't affect the people that are most vulnerable in our community. For example, people with immunosuppressive condition as well as elders who doesn't have the best immune system, and it's really important just to make sure that we don't want people to die. We don't want we also don't want to be quarantined. So these are very very helpful ways in which the government has allowed to help us to be able to achieve a type of immunity, try to get our life back to normal.
Yeah. And to add on to that too, with this pandemic, what we've seen is that it doesn't just affect the people who get coronavirus or COVID. It affects people who need other healthcare, who need other treatments as well. People aren't getting the right screenings. People aren't getting treatment at this time because the healthcare system is so tied down because of COVID. So everyone get vaccinated. It helps, so we can get our lives back to normal. Okay.
Yeah. Another good statistic that I want to bring up is that the COVID-19 incidence is actually highest in adults, but the mortality rate is highest in older adults. For all of you youngins, wanting to go out in a club, I understand that, you guys want to socialize, but you guys are bringing this back to family and bringing this back to people that aren't safe yet. So until you get vaccinated and until you pass those incubation period to make sure you're fully immune, it's also good to kind of wait it out until the time is right for all of us to be able to get back and rejoin the world. And this is data from the CDC.
And thank you for that one. So with that said, let's move on to our third topic, which is, I'm sorry, our fourth topic, which is how are these policies and strategies affecting the Vietnamese community? So I'm just going to start off by saying, in our community, we do have a lot of elderly people. A lot of a lot of people in our family are of the vulnerable population. So with the vaccine, as I'm seeing more and more people get vaccinated, it brings a lot of hope to me, because we've seen a lot of people, a lot of famous people in our community have died in the last few months, again because of COVID, because of their age, because of their pre-existing conditions. So hopefully that trend is going to slow down for us.
Yeah, and one thing to note is that especially for Vietnamese community, we tend to live in a many multi-generation household, in the sense that you have your grandma, your grandpa living with your parents, with your aunts and uncles. Definitely the best way to save money, in my opinion. But that also means that if one person get COVID, then everyone else could potentially get COVID. And these are very serious issue that I believe a lot of us have um, kind of like personal knowledge of and have experienced firsthand. So that's not something that we want to happen again. So by implementing the different policy that Biden has, like for example, to make sure that uh, we can get free COVID testing, as well as free COVID vaccine, as well as kind of like be more aware of the different statistic and the information provided from the CDC, and help our local community really understand the importance of vaccination. Then we can protect the people that are weakest, especially in our family and in our community.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Vietnamese community has been hit particularly hard during this crisis. Is that we do live in these multi-generational homes. A 2,000 square foot house. That house is about 7, 8 people, which is not abnormal especially in Southern California, where the price of real estate is quite high, and so let's encourage our elderly ones to go out, get the vaccine. So once they have the vaccine, even if we haven't gone ours yet, it does alleviate a lot of the risk for them, and helps us go back to a normal life. And now, vaccine and healthcare aside, I did want to touch on the economic policies of the Biden administration, as well as of Congress. Now, as we've mentioned earlier, on Friday, the House did pass the stimulus package, and that is going to go to the floor of the Senate. Now, we do believe that it should clear the Senate with ease. Because through the process of reconciliation, we're going to have 50 votes in the Senate, and then Kamala Harris, being the vice president, being the tiebreaker vote, she's going to push that 50 number to 51. We'll get it, and so that will pass hopefully early next week, and then Biden will sign that into law, and we'll start seeing the money and the funds coming in. Now there are few provisions in that bill that are going to affect us, our families, our community directly. Number one, I think that's going to be a big plus for that's going to affect our community is it's the PPP. Now that has been amended so that there's going to be less the likelihood of corporations, the likelihood of these bigger organizations getting PPP funding is going to be a lot lower. There are a lot more restrictions there, so it does help target smaller businesses, and there are provisions to help target businesses of color and businesses under 300 employees. The next thing that is going to be the next provision that's going to be have a big effect on our community is the child tax credit, which will be increased to between 3,000 and 3,600 dollars, depending on the age of the children, and that is going to be distributed on a monthly basis as compared to before. If you don't know anything about the child tax credit, in the past it's about $2,500 in direct payments. From your tax bill. So if if you have a positive, if you have a tax bill, it gets deducted. If your tax bill is under 2,500, you do get a refund check back, and that is going to be increased, like I said, between $3,000 to 3,600. 3,600 is for children under age, 3,000 for children between 6 and 17. That's going to be distributed monthly, so that's about $300 or up to $300 per child per family. And again, because of a lot of people in our community are running small businesses, that's where their economic base is. We're gonna see the benefit from PPP, as well as a restaurant revitalization fund. It puts about $25 billion into small businesses, and if you own a restaurant, if you've seen a loss in income between 2020 and 2019, you can access that fund to help your business not thrive, but to help your business continue running. All right. And did you want to add on to that?
I was gonna make a joke. I was gonna say, make sure this. I just hope that Republicans and the people, especially Leo's joke regarding Phở Xe Tăng, they would get the help that they that they would need from the Biden plan and be able to kind of like build up their business, even though it's okay. But going into that, so those are very, very, really interesting economic policy, and I can see that it really benefits, the Vietnamese community, because I know, by coming here and by living the American dream for the Vietnamese, just mean to be able to open up our own businesses, and opening up our own kind of like livelihood here with the community. And I believe that the additional economic measures from the Biden's plan that's coming up can help alleviate a lot of hard times for the family. And I really think that, and I really hope too that would really help the economy get back on its feet, considering that we were on hiatus for the economy for almost a year plus now. I'm quite scared of what is going to happen to the economy once we get back to our usual life.
Yes, it's going to be.
Yeah, people are telling me that there's going to be a crash somewhere.
Yeah, it's that's definitely going to be an interesting topic that we will have to cover in a different video, I'm afraid. But as far as what we can expect, it's going to be quite a bit of a slow recovery, in my opinion. A lot of people have spent their life saving. A lot of people are going to basically, once they get back into the workforce, it does take a while to recover. So hopefully, in addition to this one stimulus, we're going to see a third, a fourth, and a fifth coming from the government, so that we keep everyone afloat. So once everyone is able to get back into the workforce, life can just resume, instead of people having, and of course, a lot of people already are in heavy debt or are struggling in one way or another. And that's, once you kind of fall into that poverty cycle in the US, it's really hard to break out of, as we know. So hopefully we'll get additional funding to keep people from entering that poverty cycle. And as we've discussed, once we achieve herd immunity, we can end the shutdowns, we can have the economy resume, things will be back to normal. And so then that will bring us to our last point for today. When will it be safe for students to return to school? And I believe, Juan, you yourself are a student, very excited to return to school, right?
I can only be so excited about the best way. And speaking this from a grad student point of view, I think it's important because people learn different ways. Like, for example, for me, I like to have class to class interaction that helps me a little bit more interactive when it comes to learning. And I know in the past, I know a lot of parents at the beginning of the COVID era, they complain about now that the kids are home, it becomes a lot harder to manage normal household duties, and that's why they want the school to be open again because then they can, let these kids go to the teacher and have them take care of the kids during the daytime. And that didn't actually turn out so well, considering the fact that the COVID was still rampant and there was no cure. And even though the special precautions that they have taken back in 2020 to make sure that you won't get COVID, there always a high percentage of people that are going to get COVID anyway due to the amount of exposure you have. It's basically like kind of like a correlation ish, where the more you expose yourself to people, the more chance you can have of getting the vaccine. And these kids, especially when they start going to school, they're not always the best when it comes to cleanliness. And because of that, there had been an increase in surge for the coronavirus cases back then. But for now that we are getting more and more vaccine out, we're getting more vaccine. Eventually, I believe the kids can go back to school in a more safely ways. I do know that a few people still champion for them to come back to school almost immediately. But then I think the best thing we could do is wait until we achieve herd immunity so that the kids can be safe when they come back to school. And again, don't bring the COVID back to the household.
Of course, and from my understanding, there are procedures, and the CDC guideline does allow for schools to be reopened. Of course, we have to take the right precautions, and we have to have the right funding. So going back to the stimulus package that again was passed on Friday, we are going to be getting $130 billion in funding for schools to reopen. A lot of that funding is going to go to PPE, personal protective equipment, and the schools are required to put 20% of that money toward learning lost. So to help kids who have fallen behind to catch up on that year. Personally, I think that learning from home, or going to school from home, it's really tough for the children, and it's really tough for parents who are working from home, because you really are watching the kids 24/7. You can't, from what I've seen, it's really hard to work, especially when your children are younger. Of course, if your children are in the middle school or high school age, they are more self-sufficient. But in the elementary school age, it is more difficult. And anecdotally, I know a lot of my friends who are in the teaching profession, they are excited to have the kids back. They do want to have that level of engagement with their students, and being being blocked out of that has been quite difficult for the teachers themselves. And of course, all of this has been unanticipated. There has been no precedent. And because of that, the teachers are just scrambling by trying to figure out how to even teach kids online, and have to come up with these curriculums, have to come up with these plans. Hopefully that will things will get back to normal soon. But each state and each school board is going to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, and then hopefully then we'll be able to get back to normal life and just kind of like enjoy um, enjoy going back to be social. I know I do miss going out and having fun and kind of like being with friends in a social setting. So yeah, we do have a question here from Hui, which asks, if I get vaccinated, when can I go and hang out with my family? And that you want to visit the people that are already vaccinated. And for me, I obviously am not an expert in any way, but I would recommend taking the additional time to wait for a little bit after the vaccination to make sure you're fully vaccinated before you go and hang out with your family, and make sure your parents are already vaccinated as well. This would definitely minimize any transferring of infection of any kind. And still, I would recommend be super careful, as in wearing a mask, making sure that you are well prepared. Even though you see your parents and they're already vaccinated, it's important to also take that extra precaution in case that the mutation there might be a new mutation variation that we're not completely aware about that can be spreading. We won't know. So it's always good to take extra precaution when it comes to things like this, so that you can be able to make sure that your friends and family are safe. Yeah. Okay, so another question that I think it's important to bring up is what can we do, as the US, as the government, to prevent another global pandemic? And I can start. Because I think I think I'm a bit aware of this question, but basically, the more things, I think I think the reason why we're getting an oncoming of natural disaster, diseases, and all of that stuff, and it's mainly due to climate change, because as well as other man-made issues, for example, deforestation and suburbanation of the yeah, of the Amazon and of the other forests. And the reason why that is important is because once you kind of like alter the earth in any way, you are changing the habitat of different type of species, pushing them more towards the human population. And the more you interact with these different type of animal that we are not, always interacting with, it introduces new viruses, new bacteria into the human population, something that we're not super prepared for. Most of the research done is mainly based on what the human experience in terms of like disease and sickness. So once you start cutting down trees, once you alter the earth in any way, especially for the bat population, there is apparently a famous attraction where you can go see the bats in a cave. And I would really not recommend to do that so much, because they can, first of all, poop on your head. And second, if you breathe in at the wrong time, you could potentially be patient zero for another global pandemic. And so the key thing here for me, I feel like, is to not mess with nature, please.
Yes, there is a funny enough. There's a John Oliver episode, I believe, from that was from last weekend or 2 weekends ago. His show is Last Week Tonight. He covers the issue, the question, very good details. And as An said, a lot of the issues is, number one, we're entering, we're entering territory that has traditionally been more nature, more forest, more jungles. We're expanding our civilization, number one, and then number two, a lot of countries, a lot of cultures are, bringing animals into civilization, either as food or as pets or other kind of collectibles. So we do need to avoid that. One thing I've learned very recently is that they carry a lot of diseases. Funny enough, because they don't have a very strong immune system. So when a virus attacks their body, their immune system doesn't react strongly to that virus, and so they live with a lot of those viruses in their body, including, as we know, coronavirus. And we've known that coronavirus has always had the potential to cross over and infect humans. That the research has been done for decades now, and unfortunately, when it did happen, it happened under an administration that was ill-equipped to handle a pandemic. But the U.S. was, prior to 2020, was seen to be the most equipped country to handle a pandemic. And in fact, when you look at countries like Germany, Vietnam, South Korea, New Zealand, countries that have handled the pandemic well, they took the playbook from the US. The US did write the playbook on the pandemic. We know how to deal with it. Unfortunately, we had an administration, and we also had a population that was resistant to a lot of those policies. And because of that, we weren't able to handle the pandemic properly. And if you look at Mongolia, Mongolia has also done very well in handling this pandemic. And what Mongolia did, was suggested very early on, is that they had a 5-week straight shutdown. Everything closes, no work, nothing, complete shutdown. And because of that, they were able to stave off the coronavirus while it just ravaged on in the neighboring country, which is Russia, as well as China early on. And so there are ways for us to avoid these issues, and hopefully under this administration and future administration, we're going to get better funding, we're going to get better resources. We have the people, we have the talents to help us manage through these pandemics, and we should listen to them. Right on.
Yeah, I actually watched that episode that you were talking about because Duke likes John Oliver, and because of that, I find the show quite informative. And I do wanted to bring up, back in the Obama administration, there was the outbreak of the Ebola virus, not only like a few years before the coronavirus happened, and that is because of mainly the patient zero was identified as a kid that was playing nearby a tree that has bat feces on them, and that is why the kid caught the first case of Ebola virus that ended up spreading to his local village, where the current the environment around them are already becoming more suburbanized, and that is why and then from there they're able to handle it quite, I guess, efficiently, right? Because then the Obama administration would send people over to where the ground zero is to be able to stop it from spreading to other part of the world, basically. And maybe they did it too well, where they depleted all their stock supplies. So instead of in that way we didn't have enough supplies for the upcoming coronavirus, and that is because it wasn't being replenished at a consistent rate. And I think that for future implementation, we just got to make sure that all our stockpiles are full, so that we can make sure that we can handle the next global pandemic properly, as well as make sure we listen to scientists as well, and the people that make sure that everyone is safe. So
And as much as traumatic as this episode has been for the US, I hope that we can, when we move forward, we recognize how tragic this pandemic has been. So when the next one arrives, we don't treat it the same way we did with this one, because a lot of the reasons why we were hit so hard was just because it comes down to human behavior, and we weren't listening to the scientists. We weren't, there weren't policies put into effect that had followed guidelines from the scientists. So hopefully, we can learn from we can learn this lesson, and and in the future apply these lessons. Now, there's another question, which is, why is California COVID-19 infection rates still so high? Juan, do you want to tackle this one first, or do you want me to?
uh wait, which
So
question
this
was
is
it?
so this is about California, and why COVID-19 numbers in California are still so high. So I'll start and say how it spiked early on. Now, the spike happened. The spike was strongest in Southern California, and the main reason, there are two reasons why. Right, number one is that Southern California is heavily the economy is based on the service industry, so restaurants, entertainment, a lot of tourism, and because those are industries where people interact with each other. It's not like Northern California, where the economy is based more on science and engineering, and you can have people working from their laptops at home. In Southern California, people, when the restaurants close, a lot of people would struggle. Number one. Number two is that we see, especially in minority, in households of people of color, we do see these multi-generational families that are living, like as we've discussed earlier, we see 7-8 people living in a house of about 2,000 square feet. So when one person who works in the service industry, and especially because people of color tend to work in the service industry, they catch the virus, they come home, they spread it to their entire family. And so that's why Southern California particularly has become such an epicenter of the coronavirus. And then if you look at Orange County specifically, that is, of course, there is a very strong contingent of Trump supporters there. And as we've seen in our Vietnamese community, they were out, they were disregarding health guidelines. They really embraced everything that Trump and what QAnon said, and we saw huge spikes of COVID, especially in our community in Southern California. And even though Southern California has one of the highest number of beds per capita in the country, at one point they had hit 100% of capacity in the ICU, and because of that, a lot of people were, you know, they had they were having serious reactions, but they weren't getting treated because there were not enough hospital beds, and so it keeps it was a very tough cycle in California.
Yeah, and then also keep in mind that, you know, a lot of people aren't insured.
Mhm.
And I think because of that, and especially this is coming also from my family, no shade whatsoever, but we would like to not go to the hospital if we don't have to.
Mhm.
And I think it's a quite a dangerous mindset, really, when it comes to, you know, making sure that you can fight off this coronavirus, because then we don't want to spend unnecessarily money. Plus, we're not well informed enough, and plus, you know, healthcare sucks, which is another issue for another day, really. And then a combination of that, you have a bunch of people with no health insurance and no way to be able to identify if they are a silent carrier or a, you know, an active carrier of the coronavirus, and that is causing, you know, a lot of COVID rates to jump.
Yeah.
And that is why I would think that is why the California COVID-19 infection is still so high. And yeah.
And anecdotally too, within our Vietnamese community, from what I've heard, a lot of people, especially a lot of Republican-leaning members of our community, they would catch the virus and keep it a secret because it's some sort of shame to them. And because of that, and then some people just, even when they catch the virus, they completely disregard the severity of the virus. And when they don't feel the symptoms, they go out. They don't, they don't isolate themselves. They don't quarantine themselves, and it really exploded. And again, it really hit our community in the Saigon pretty hard, especially back in November, December, and January. And like I said, we've seen plenty of high-profile Vietnamese members of our community pass away recently, which is very tragic for us.
Yeah, and then another thing is that the coronavirus actually identified around actually around December and ish, January-ish. The first cases of it was identified back then, and it turns out that if we were more informed and if the government has taken action right in time, we could have prevented a lot of unfortunate death, really, when it comes to the coronavirus infection, as well as, you know, the death that comes along with it. And I think, you know, I think the main thing to be able to make sure for future implementation is just to make sure you are transparent with the people that you govern, because the more people know, then the more people can actively kind of like prepare for it. Definitely not the, you know, toilet paper type fiasco that we saw, but but in a sense where they can rely on news and data to be able and trust the experts to be able to know how to properly handle the COVID effectively.
Yes, and one thing that we also have to recognize too, and unfortunately we weren't seeing that from the previous administration, is that when you do shut down the economy, you still have to make sure people's livelihoods are intact. And one of the reasons why people were so anxious to restart the economy is that they weren't getting support from the government. Now, what I believe you and myself would advocate for is that was government funding, government checks to these people, so that if they can't work, if they're in the service industry, if they're in whatever line of work that cannot be that where they cannot work from home, they can get funding from the government to keep their livelihood, so that they don't fall into debt, so that they can maintain their mortgage payments, their rent payments, they can keep food on the table. And that would allow them to, number one, encourage them to, number one, stay at home, and then number two, to not go out and disregard safety protocols and social distancing rules, and basically just delude themselves into thinking that the coronavirus is some sort of hoax, and that it's just as bad as the flu, which we know it's not. It's a lot more. It's a lot. It's a lot more lethal than the flu. So in the future, we do need to have better plans in place, so that way we can do what Europe and Canada and other countries have done, which is to basically pay people to stay at home and let the so that we don't have 500,000 people die.
Unfortunately, I think the number goes to like 60K now, people that have died from coronavirus, which is quite unfortunate. But the last topic of the day is we have wanted to kind of like touch on the recent Asian attacks, that they're blaming Asian people, especially Asian American, for this pandemic. And I just want to reiterate, Chinese American aren't Chinese, like Chinese. I mean, they're Chinese of ethnicity, but they're not. It's a whole thing. But the coronavirus itself is not because of Chinese people in any way. One person was there at a wrong time, and then obviously the Wuhan meat market is you know, an easy place for infection to transfer from one person to another. And the thing is, the U.S. is also responsible for other diseases as well, such as the Lyme disease that was originally originated here, but we don't call it the American disease in any way. So first of all, I believe it really has to do with when Trump called it the Chinese virus on national TV to pursue this type of hate towards Asian American who wasn't even there when the infection happened. We didn't even cause it in any way, and it led to a increase in attack for Asian Americans and Asian elders, which is quite unfortunate because they are the most vulnerable part of our Asian community.
Yes, and it's unfortunate because, of course, bullies don't attack people who can defend themselves, right? They attack the people who are vulnerable, and that's what we've seen. That's why we see the attacks are mostly not against younger Asian males. I'm going to say it number one leans toward the elderly. It leans toward the very the upper the most old. I want to say the oldest people in our community, people who are in octogenarians, people who are 80, 90, and are very, very weak and vulnerable. And number two is toward Asian American women. We don't really see as much of the attack against younger Asian men. And again, it's because bullies like to attack those they see as more vulnerable. As far as, the Chinese, the Wuhan meat market, the wet market, I'm sorry, and getting meat, basically looking at looking at meat that are not coming from farms and getting a meat from nature in that manner. I forgot what's the term for it, but those are issues that China should look at, and they need to have policies to help to help curb the risk of future infections, because we've known that wet markets like that are prone or are vulnerable to susceptible to diseases like the coronavirus. So hopefully they will implement policies there. But as far as calling it the China virus, one virus that we always look back to and we always reference in this pandemic is, of course, the Spanish flu, which did not originate in Spain. The Spanish flu came from Kansas, right? And so using those kind of terminologies, number one, is misleading, and then number two, it hurts communities like ours, because Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, we're all Asian Americans, we're all part of the AAPI community in this country. And so if they're being attacked, we're being attacked. And we see it, it's Thai Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Chinese Americans, everyone is being attacked. And we need to get rid of that language especially in our community. We cannot let that kind of prejudice pervade in our community, and then and we need to fight it in the broader American society as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that one person's fault is not the entire nationality's fault. So, I see a lot of parallel with this going back to 9/11 is actually quite, like a tough spot for a lot of American. But then there's also an increase in hate crimes against Muslim all around the world because they're now being labeled as terrorists because of a small group of people decided to do a few bad things. And not saying that, that the Chinese government caused this in any way, caused this, like, in any way at all. But, you're attacking all of us for something that we weren't even aware we weren't doing. I think it's like we need to get out of that mindset of us versus them. We need to be like, we're all in this together, okay? And we need to figure that out together by coming together. And I honestly think, the way we think of right now, where it's like an us versus them, it really comes into a lot of like issues that we have to deal with from day-to-day basis. For example, systemic racism and all the other issue that really we need to kind of fix that mindset where it's no longer us versus them, is we're all in this together. And I think once all of us come into that realization, hopefully then we can come up with better solution and implementation to prevent another global pandemic. Hopefully.
Yes, there's a lot of issues for us to resolve. But for us here today at KNKB, this is the end of our live stream. Thank you, Juan, for joining us and providing so much insight into the science behind this pandemic. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye, everyone.
All right. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe our videos, okay?
Yeah, I'll see you guys.